My name is Delilah, 34 years old, living and working in Austin, Texas. 6 months ago, with less than 2 weeks until my wedding day, I walked into my mother's house to pick up the printed invitations, only to find a cold, handwritten note lying in the center of the kitchen table. Wedding canceled. Don't call again. Handle it yourself. No explanation, no phone call, not a single word from anyone. But that wasn't the worst of it. Just a few hours later, I received a video clip. Wearing the wedding dress I had chosen, standing in the setting I had designed for over a year, was my sister. Have you ever had a loved one destroy everything you cherished, then act as if you never existed? If this story stirs something inside you, leave a comment below, hit like, and subscribe to the channel. Because what I'm about to share next, no one is ever truly prepared to face. I sat in my car for nearly 3 hours, engines still running, music off, just staring at that harsh message on the paper like I could somehow wake myself from a warped dream. But everything remained painfully clear. The wedding I had spent over a year planning was canceled without warning, and the one person I believed would stand by me through anything still hadn't replied to my texts. I called Matthew. No answer. I tried again. Line busy. By the third attempt, it went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I just stared at his name on the screen, my chest heavy like a stone lodged between my lungs. Matthew once told me, no matter what happens, I'll always choose to believe you first. And now, there was silence. I tried to sleep around dawn the next morning. When I woke up, my phone lit up with a short message as sharp as a slap. This isn't working. Don't contact me again. No apology, no question if I was okay, no curiosity about why the wedding was suddenly called off, just 6 words, as if our entire relationship had never been worth fighting for. I stumbled into the bathroom, looked in the mirror. Whose face was that? A 34-year-old woman who'd just been abandoned by her own family and dismissed by the man she was supposed to marry, via text. I ordered an Uber because my hands were still too unsteady to drive. I needed answers. I needed to look Matthew in the eye. By the time the car pulled up to his house, I felt completely hollow inside. I walked up to the porch and knocked. No one answered, but the door was ajar, like someone had left in a hurry and forgot to lock it. I pushed it open gently and stepped inside. The smell of fresh detergent and women's perfume hit me all at once. Not anything I recognized, definitely not mine. In the living room was an open suitcase, clothes folded neatly as if someone was mid-move. On the dining table, 2 wine glasses, still holding the last drops. I walked further in, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I saw them. Matthew was standing with his back to me, headphones on, laughing and saying something I couldn't hear, and the person lounging casually on the sofa as if she'd always belonged there was Rachel, my sister. Her hair was tied up high. She wore the sweater I had bought Mom for Christmas. Her eyes met mine, and instead of shock or guilt, she simply smirked, calm as if I were someone no longer relevant to her life. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Matthew turned around, saw me, and for a brief moment, panic flashed in his eyes, lasting less than a second. Delilah. I thought you... Thought I what? My voice came out quieter than I expected. Thought I had disappeared just like you all wanted? Rachel stood up and stretched like she'd just woken from a nap. You shouldn't walk into someone's house uninvited, even if you're the ex. I stared straight at her. I booked the venue. I signed the contracts. That dress was mine. The invitations, the music, the menu, every detail was mine. Rachel didn't deny it. She shrugged. If you don't move fast, someone else will. Matthew stepped forward, about to speak. I raised my hand. Don't. From now on, I don't want to hear another word from either of you. I turned and walked out of the house that once held our plans for the future. Now, it held nothing but the dust of betrayal. On the ride back, I checked my phone out of habit. A new notification popped up. Rachel had posted something. Sometimes things work out for who they're meant for. Happy beginnings. Below that, a series of wedding photos. The white gown with the fitted bodice and intricate lace I had commissioned back in February, the amber bouquet, the champagne-toned backdrop, the string lights I had personally drafted lighting diagrams for, and Matthew's eyes, looking at Rachel like she was his entire world. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't call anyone. I just sat quietly, staring at each perfectly edited photo, every comment praising the perfect couple, how fate works in mysterious ways, each one a sugar-coated knife. This had once been my story. Now they had erased me and pasted in a different name, without hesitation. And the part that hurt the most wasn't the betrayal. It was the assumption that I would simply accept it as inevitable. I stayed up the whole night, not out of heartbreak or anger. I felt like floating in cold water, not knowing how deep it went. Everything was too quiet. I could hear every breath I took. On my desk, my old laptop still sat, dusty and faded. I hadn't opened it in over 2 years, not since switching after my last promotion. But tonight I needed to go back, to see clearly what had been hidden. I turned it on, fingers still remembering the password. The screen lit up. A folder appeared like a time capsule cracked open. Archives_D, a name I'd once given. I opened it, not knowing exactly what I was looking for, only knowing that I had to start somewhere. Inbox export, a string of saved emails caught my eye. One from Matthew, dated 3 years ago, surfaced like a soft tap to the chest. I know your mom thinks you're emotionally difficult, but I love you anyway. I leaned back. The words were gentle, sharp as a blade. Back then, I had brushed it off with a quiet laugh, thinking he meant well. Now I saw only one thing. He had known, long before I did, that my mother had been crafting a distorted version of me. And he had chosen to love me despite that. I moved on to therapy recordings. Mom had been the one to suggest therapy after Dad passed. She said I needed to process my emotions properly, and even offered to help pick a therapist. I used to be grateful for that, but in an old audio file labeled session_5M4A, I found something else. My voice hesitant. I always feel like I have to apologize. No matter what I do, it's wrong. The therapist's voice, calm. Who makes you feel that way? I paused, then replied, my mom says I overreact to everything, that I try to control people, that I'm like Dad, too sensitive, unstable. The therapist asked, do you believe her? I didn't answer in the recording, but now I knew I once did. Enough to doubt myself for nearly a decade. I closed the file and opened the folder labeled D's Old Files. It was where I used to store scanned documents from when I applied for my very first job. I scrolled down and immediately froze when I saw a PDF titled Behavioral Private. I opened it. The first page had my full name, social security number, and a brief assessment of my emotional state. But the signature wasn't mine. And the clinic address? It was somewhere I'd never set foot in. The next page was a report describing irregular behavior, heightened emotional reactions, and difficulty managing stress in high-pressure environments. My chest went cold as I read. At the bottom of the document was a note. Internal report, not to be shared externally unless approved by guardian or legal representative. I paused. Guardian? I had never been declared legally incompetent or in need of one. I checked the file properties. It was created in August last year, right after Matthew proposed to me. Next, I opened a file named Asset Review _2020 ZMM. It listed multiple assets under the name Delilah Monroe. That's me. But next to them were notes, temporarily authorized to R. Monroe, per internal family agreement. Some entries had forged signatures of my name, the handwriting stiff and unnatural. I typed authorization into the search bar. Dozens of files appeared. One was titled Emotional Support History, formatted like a chart, as if someone had been carefully compiling a psychological profile to portray me as unstable. I sat still, hands resting on my thighs. I had spent years living in a house built with the bricks of gentle manipulation. My mother never screamed. She whispered, comforted, consoled, and hurt me with honey-coated needles. I remembered when she called me at midnight saying Rachel had been crying because I was too rigid about the wedding, that I should let a few little things go for the sake of family harmony. I agreed. I was always the one who stepped back first. But now it was clear every one of those little decisions had been part of a larger plan, to quietly erase me using my own hands. I opened a blank document and started typing. Today, I no longer have any doubt. They didn't want me to marry. They didn't want me to hold on to my assets. They didn't want me to stand tall. And they've been preparing for this for a long time. I saved the file, named it Now I See. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew that from this point forward, no one could say I was unstable, unreliable, or weak. No one. I hadn't heard Lucas's name in years. He was the first man who ever loved me with gentleness and honesty. No rush. No agenda. We met sophomore year during political philosophy class and broke up after graduation for a reason that always felt vague. I think you need to focus on yourself. I don't want to be a burden. I blamed myself for a long time for driving someone like him away, but that night, after everything I found on my laptop, I opened my phone and typed his name into the search. Not out of emotion, but because I needed the truth. The number was still there. The message, last seen recently, showed up in the app. I typed, Lucas, it's Delilah. I need to talk. Not about us, it's about my mother. He read it 3 minutes later. A chat bubble appeared. I'm in Austin for the next 3 days. Where do you want to meet? We picked a small coffee shop by the lake, the same one we used to visit back in college. When I arrived, Lucas was already there. Still the same sleeves, neatly rolled, slim frame, steady presence. Only his eyes had changed, deeper, more patient. Hey, he said, voice hesitant. Been a while. I sat down, keeping my hands from trembling. I'll get straight to the point. Did you leave, not because of me, but because of my mother? Lucas stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. She called me. 2 days after I told you I wanted to bring you home to meet my parents. He spoke slowly, like each word had weight. She said, if I didn't want to be sued for harassing her mentally unstable daughter, I'd better disappear. I leaned forward. And you believed her? I didn't know what to believe. She told me you had a history of psychological treatment, that you'd had episodes in past relationships. She said I was making things worse, that I was the reason you were spiraling. I was 24, Delilah. I wasn't strong enough to know what was real. I didn't blame him. I just asked, and you kept all that to yourself until now? Lucas pulled a small USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. She left a voicemail. I haven't listened to it in years, but after you messaged me yesterday, I knew I had to give it to you. I picked it up. My fingers still bore red marks from gripping my phone all night. What's on it? I asked, unsure if I was ready. She said you were sexually obsessive, that you'd ruined friendships out of jealousy, that you'd self-harmed when you couldn't control people. Lucas's voice grew quiet. None of it was true, but when a mother talks about her own child like that, people don't question it. I looked at him, trying not to let the pain twisting in my chest show. And you think I should believe you didn't doubt me? Lucas was silent for a moment. I don't think you have to believe anything. Just listen. Decide for yourself. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he looked up, voice more firm. I'm still in law, estate and civil disputes. About a year ago, I saw your name in a provisional asset list our firm was hired to process for a client named Julia Monroe. I exhaled. My mother. I wasn't involved directly, but I remembered the name and the note. Asset titled under daughter's name, managed and signed by mother. He looked straight at me. After your message, I dug up the file. Delilah, your mother's name is on at least 2 properties and 1 small trust account, all meant for you. There's a house outside Houston that names you as the beneficiary, but the legal representative is Julia, and the signature doesn't match what I remember from you. I couldn't speak. The pieces I'd been connecting were now fully formed. This wasn't just a feeling of betrayal anymore. It was documented, signed, notarized, weaponized. Can you help me get it all back? I asked, voice almost a whisper. Lucas nodded. If you have proof that you never authorized any of it, yes, you can sue for full recovery. I looked out over the lake, the surface calm as if nothing had ever disturbed it. I wasn't that college girl anymore. No longer someone who thought she was a burden. If someone spent years crafting a false story about me, it's time I told the real one, in my own voice. That morning, it drizzled softly. I sat behind the wheel, holding an old receipt I found buried in a drawer in the living room. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. Storage unit lease, unit C17, DeLacy. Delilah Monroe. I'd never rented a storage unit. Didn't even know my name was on one, but the address was there, and the billing account matched a secondary credit line I once had. One my mother offered to handle for me while I was busy with work. The facility was on the city's edge, in an industrial zone surrounded by dull silver fencing. The clerk gave me a strange look when I showed my ID and asked for unit C17. He checked the system, then handed me a small key ring with a quiet reminder. The contract renews yearly, ma'am, paid from an account under your name, but the initial lease was signed over 6 years ago. 6 years? I repeated, my palms suddenly cold. Yes, the person who signed the contract left a power of attorney. The original's gone, but the archived record confirms it. I didn't ask anything else. The key felt like ice in my hand as I walked toward the gray-painted row of storage units. Unit C17 sat at the far end of the hallway, behind a slightly rusted metal door. The lock turned too easily, like it had never been replaced. When the door creaked open, a damp chill mixed with the scent of old paper and canvas rushed out. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam swept across neatly stacked cardboard boxes, each labeled by hand. Finance, DM. Archived records, personal. Transferred assets, urgent. I opened the first box near the door. Inside were dozens of file folders, each tagged with colored stickers. Bank statements, unsecured loan records, secondary credit cards, even personal loan contracts bearing my signature. Except, I never signed any of them. I pulled out one folder labeled Delilah Monroe Home Rehabilitation Loan, the amount $54,000. The registration date matched the year I was in that car accident, but I never received a single cent from any loan like that. Attached was a detailed statement showing every dollar being deposited into an account under the name J. Monroe, property administrator. I held my breath. My fingers froze. I kept checking the boxes further back. Another contained cream-colored folders, most yellowed with age. One file was tied with a red ribbon, with soft handwriting in the corner. Delilah, inheritance. Open only when necessary. I untied it and opened it. What lay before me was a notarized will dated nearly 14 years ago, just 2 weeks before my father passed. I read the first line, and suddenly it felt like the rain outside had doubled in weight. I, Thomas Monroe, being of sound mind, hereby declare this will to divide my estate to my daughter Delilah Monroe, including full ownership of the residence at 1847 Maplewood, and a life insurance policy worth $150,000. I stopped. My heart thundered. That house, the one I grew up in. After Dad died, my mother told me he left nothing behind, and the house had been transferred to her and Rachel for easier management. I was never asked. I never signed anything. I turned the pages. At the end were my father's signature and those of two witnesses. Every page had a clear official notary stamp. I sat down, right there on the floor, the will in my hands, my head spinning in a fog of memories. I remembered my 23rd birthday when I asked Mom about Dad's estate. She had stroked my shoulder and said, "Your father didn't leave anything. We had no money back then." I believed her. I was naive enough to think the only parent I had left would never hide something so important from me. I carefully packed the documents back into the box and took photos of every page. What I found today wasn't just evidence. It was the beginning of a truth I had to uncover, not for revenge, but to know exactly what was stolen from me and why the people I once called family did it in silence. I walked into Amanda Wells' office on a calm March afternoon. The sky outside was still, but I felt no peace. Her office was bright, minimal, her walls lined with framed degrees and records of won cases. Amanda wasn't a friend. She was someone Lucas recommended. But the moment I placed the storage files on her desk, she looked me in the eye and said, without pretense, "If what's in here is real, then they're going to pay." I sat up straight, my fingers gently wrapped around the tea she had poured. "I don't want noise. I just want the truth to be seen." Amanda opened the folder, scanning each section quickly. Forged signatures, unauthorized asset transfers, inheritance rights violations, misappropriated insurance funds, and this charity fund. I nodded. "It bears my name, but I've never run it. She used it to legitimize donations for major foundations." She shut the folder. "We're going to file charges against 3 people. Julia Monroe, in her capacity as estate manager, Rachel Monroe for unlawful transfers, and Matthew Cole for collusion and illegal gain. Reputation, property, and legal records, they'll all go to trial." I pulled an envelope from my bag and set it on the table. Inside are copies of the contracts, receipts, screenshots, and recordings Lucas helped collect. I flagged the key details. Amanda didn't say much. She nodded once, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Good. We'll send the first warning letter within 48 hours, along with a preliminary evidence list. If they don't respond on time, we proceed with formal action." When I left her office, I didn't feel lighter, but I no longer felt lost. I didn't have to guess anymore. Everything was finally clear. 3 days later, the warning letters were delivered to each of them. Matthew didn't reply. Rachel viewed the email but never responded. Julia sent one message to my old number. Just one sentence. "If this is your choice, then I will no longer take responsibility." I showed the message to Amanda. She logged it without comment. 2 weeks later, I was sipping coffee alone at a familiar cafe near the lake when my phone buzzed. It was Amanda's assistant. "Miss Monroe," the woman said hesitantly, "we just received a countersuit from Julia Monroe and Rachel Monroe. They've filed a motion to assess your mental capacity." I went quiet. "You mean they're trying to place me under guardianship?" "Exactly," she replied. "Their claim includes threats toward family members, unstable emotional state, risk of damaging group reputation, and inability to manage personal assets." I closed my eyes for a moment. Everything became clearer than ever. They didn't just want what I had. They wanted me erased from my own decisions. That same afternoon, I returned to Amanda's office. She was already seated with their court submission on her desk. The cover page read in bold, "Petition to appoint guardian for Delilah Monroe due to limited civil capacity." Amanda flipped through the pages. In the appendix were 3 witness statements, one from Matthew, one from Rachel, and one from someone claiming to be a psychologist named Harriet, a woman I'd never met. "This declaration is notarized," Amanda said, pointing to the signature at the bottom. "But there's a problem." She pulled out a signature sample I'd given for a previous case. Placing the 2 side by side, she pointed at Rachel's document. "This signature is off. Your final stroke always loops upward. This one extends flat." The forger copied the form, but missed the detail. I stared closely, my heart pounding. "You're sure?" Amanda nodded. "I already asked a handwriting analyst to review it. She confirmed it's forged. And she's willing to testify." I exhaled slowly. So we can prove they fabricated this? Not just that, Amanda said, her voice cold and steady. We can countersue for falsifying evidence, attempting to strip legal agency, and intentional defamation. I leaned back, looking out the window. The sky was still bright, but the sunlight had lost its warmth. Everything they'd tried to build around me, paper lies, manipulative glances, patronizing pity, was beginning to crack. I arrived at court early that morning, carrying the case folder Amanda had prepared all week. I wore a simple ash-gray dress with silver cufflinks at the wrists, not to draw attention, but to remind myself I wasn't here to play the victim. I was here to speak the truth. The courtroom was quiet as we walked in. Julia sat with her attorney, hair curled just right, beige coat folded neatly on her lap. Rachel showed up right before the session, dressed in dark tones, light makeup barely masking her tension. Matthew kept his head down, eyes fixed on his papers, never once glancing my way. When the judge entered, everyone stood. She was a woman in her 60s, silver hair tied back, eyes so sharp that she didn't need to raise her voice to silence the room. She looked over both sides and said firmly, "This is a civil preliminary hearing. I don't care who's the mother, the daughter, or the former fiancé. I want the truth. Let the documents speak." Julia's attorney began with a lengthy report, arguing that I exhibited unstable emotional outbursts, that I had refused therapy despite the family's multiple recommendations, and that I was trying to destroy my relatives' reputations due to a personal grudge. Amanda didn't interrupt. She sat still, waiting her turn. When the judge gave a nod, she stood up and calmly opened the first folder. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "we have submitted a rebuttal document of over 80 pages, including screenshots, wire transfer records, insurance contracts, and receipts from the archive proving that my client, Ms. Delilah Monroe, was stripped of her legal assets through forged documents and impersonated in financial transactions for years." Julia leaned slightly, her eyes locked on me. I didn't look back. My eyes stayed fixed on the judge. Amanda continued. "Additionally, we'd like to call a witness, someone who served as the Monroe family's accountant from 2015 to 2020, Mrs. Linda Carter." A soft murmur stirred behind me. The courtroom doors opened. Mrs. Linda entered, her silver hair neatly trimmed, holding a black document case, her steps slow but resolute. Julia glanced at Rachel. Their expressions shifted instantly, just for a moment. Linda stepped up to the stand, was sworn in, and began her testimony. Her voice was raspy but clear. "I worked with the Monroe family for many years. I was asked to handle several transactions related to internal gifts, event planning, and reimbursed expenses. However, I discovered that from 2018 to 2021, there were 12 transfers from Ms. Delilah's secondary account to an account under Rachel Monroe's name, each labeled wedding advance or charity project reimbursement." Amanda handed a folder to the judge. "These are bank statements printed directly from the system before Mrs. Carter resigned due to personal health reasons." Linda nodded, eyes facing forward. "I was also present when Mrs. Julia requested that I generate a fake invoice for a flower vendor, using Ms. Delilah's name, but sending it to Rachel's house. When I asked about it, she casually replied, 'It's family. It's all the same in the end.'" Rachel shook her head, whispering to her attorney. Matthew stared at the floor, silent. The judge flipped through the documents and looked toward Julia's lawyer. "Any objections to this evidence?" she asked. Julia's attorney stood, voice tightening. "We question the witness's credibility, as she left her position under questionable circumstances." Linda didn't wait. "I left because I refused to keep signing off on unclear transactions, and I have the recording of that conversation." The judge nodded. "The recording will be reviewed if necessary. For now, the evidence is clear: unauthorized transfers, misuse of names, and signs of forgery. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was already in the numbers, the documents, and the honest voice of an older woman, one of the few who ever saw me as a person and not a payment method." After the testimony, the court recessed. I stepped into the hallway. My chest didn't feel lighter, but something inside began to loosen, like blood flow returning after years of tight compression. I knew the battle was far from over, but at least I wasn't walking through the dark alone anymore. I realized early on that the truth alone wasn't always enough, unless it was brought into the light at the right time. 3 days after the hearing, while the media remained quiet and the public still barely aware of my name, Rachel made her move. Her article dropped early Monday morning, just as people sipped their coffee and scrolled their phones. The title, When Family is the Most Dangerous Place, How I Survived My Sister's Threats. In it, Rachel painted a story of a traumatizing past, portraying me as a controlling older sister who once threw a glass at our mother, used hateful words during late-night calls, and, most damaging, once threatened her life over inheritance disputes. The final line stopped me cold for several seconds. Not everyone should be allowed the freedom to act if their actions make others live in fear. Julia dropped a heart emoji beneath it. Matthew left a simple comment, "The truth deserves a voice." Within an hour, the post had over 5,000 shares. I received nearly 30 messages from former coworkers, classmates, even people I had volunteered with over a decade ago. Some asked if I was okay. The rest just sent me the link, waiting for me to speak up. I opened my laptop and typed the only title that came to mind. Here's what they erased. No frills, no tears, no pleas, just the truth. I created a post broken into clearly dated sections. The first was a timeline from 2014 to the present, each point paired with supporting documents. I scanned wire transfers from my secondary account to Rachel's with transaction IDs. The insurance policy in my name, but Julia listed as the payout recipient, alongside her bank deposit log. A message from Matthew admitting Julia sent him falsified medical records before he proposed. A voice recording Lucas retrieved, Julia saying I was too weak to handle the truth, better let others decide for her. Wedding dress receipts in my name, payment confirmation emails, all predating Rachel's wedding held at the same venue. No dramatics, just facts. At the end, I wrote, "You don't need to believe me because I'm convincing. Just look at what they tried to erase." I hit publish. The post passed 50,000 shares in 2 days, but what surprised me most was that it wasn't a friend or family member who helped spread it. It was a nonprofit called Women First Legal Alliance, dedicated to protecting women cut off from financial autonomy. They messaged me 3 hours after the post went live. "You are not alone. If you need independent forensic accounting support, we have a team ready." The next day, 3 major newspapers reached out for interviews. A podcast asked if I would speak from the perspective of someone erased by their own blood. I didn't respond. I wasn't trying to be a symbol. I just wanted the facts to stay whole. Amanda called that afternoon. "Your post shook them," she said. "But what I'm holding might rattle them even more." She sent over a fax, no sender's name, labeled Read Julia Monroe, Life Insurance Claim 2009. I opened the file. It was a payment report from the life insurance company. $200,000 issued 6 weeks after my father passed. Recipient, Julia. The original beneficiary listed in the contract, me. This fax came from a law firm that once represented the insurer, Amanda explained. "I'm tracing the source, but the withdrawal signature clearly isn't yours." I said nothing. I stared at the last line of the fax. This claim was filed under Family Reassignment Clause, signed by legal guardian on behalf of beneficiary. Legal. Approved. Papered over, but all built on a lie. An adult doesn't need a guardian, unless someone manufactures proof to make it so. I held the file, stepped onto the balcony, and looked across rooftops fading in the pale evening light. I used to think that if I ever told the full truth, someone might ask if it hurt, if I was tired, if I was scared. But now I understand, not everyone needs to ask. Sometimes they just need to see what's been hidden, and from there, they'll start to see everything else. And the truth, when placed where it belongs, will always find a way to speak without needing to scream. The morning of the final hearing, the sky was neither sunny nor rainy, just a pale gray curtain stretching across the entire city. I sat in the back seat of Amanda's car, my hand loosely holding the file folder, feeling neither rushed nor indifferent. It had been nearly 8 months since I found that piece of paper my mother left on the kitchen counter. Everything began with 7 cold words and ended with a stack of legal documents just as cold. The only difference was that this time, the signature at the bottom was mine. The courtroom wasn't packed, but every eye was fixed on one spot. Julia sat upright across the room, wearing another dark dress like she had at previous sessions. Rachel arrived late, her low heels clacking quickly across the wood floor. Matthew no longer sat with them. He chose the last seat in the row, his eyes sinking into the wall. I didn't bother looking at them closely. The only person I needed to see was the one standing above us all, the judge, whose gaze had never allowed anyone to turn her courtroom into a family stage. When she spoke, the room fell nearly silent. The court has reviewed all submitted evidence, testimony, financial records, and responses from all involved parties. Based on the statutes outlined in the Inheritance Law and the Personal Honor Protection Act, the court rules as follows. I heard every word, clearly, fully, without missing a beat. Miss Delilah Monroe is hereby reinstated as the rightful heir to property number 1847 Maplewood, in accordance with the original will of Mr. Thomas Monroe. I didn't nod, didn't react. My gaze remained on the table in front of me, my hand tightening slightly at the edge of the file. Currently held the life insurance fund, valued at $200,000, currently held in a temporarily frozen account under the name Julia Monroe, shall be fully transferred to Miss Delilah Monroe within 10 business days. Across the room, Julia's expression didn't shift. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, nails still painted a nude shade as always, her thumb lightly brushing her palm. I recognized that sign. She was trying to stay calm. Regarding the defamation claim, the judge continued, the defendants, Mrs. Rachel Monroe and Mr. Matthew Cole, are hereby ordered to issue a public retraction of all allegations previously posted on social media and other public platforms. Additionally, they are to compensate the plaintiff for emotional distress in the amount of $65,000. I saw Matthew's head dip lower. Rachel turned away, her shoulders trembling, but no one said a word. The judge paused a few seconds before going on. As for Mrs. Julia Monroe, while the court does not mandate a written apology, due to her lack of financial transparency, the court requires an independent audit of all charitable fund activities conducted under her name over the past 12 years. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Julia turned slightly toward her attorney but did not object. She understood. This was the only way to salvage the last piece of her public reputation. The court hereby declares the civil case Monroe v. Monroe closed, the judge announced. This hearing is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed against the wood. Not harsh, not dramatic, just enough to seal away the months I had spent gathering every fragment of truth they'd tried to bury. I stood up, picked up my file, and walked out. Amanda walked beside me without speaking, just gently placed her hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture, but warm. In the hallway, I passed Julia standing alone, without a lawyer, without Rachel. She turned when I walked by. Her eyes held no anger, no sadness, just emptiness. You've destroyed everything, she said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. I stopped, but didn't turn around. No, Mom. I just refused to be erased again. I kept walking, past Rachel hunched over on the long bench, past Matthew staring into his phone as if it could speak the words he no longer had the courage to say. Outside on the courthouse steps, a gentle breeze carried a dried leaf from a tree not yet bare. I took a deep breath. There was no explosive joy, no dramatic tears. I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt intact. I walked away from a battle without shrinking into someone else's shadow. No one could define me anymore, except me. 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a thick envelope by registered mail, no sender listed. I recognized the handwriting instantly, the same right slanting script Rachel had used since high school, a little tight at the start of each line. Inside was a check for $65,000. The handwritten note simply read, "Damages. No reply needed." I sat quietly for a few minutes, then walked into my office where the late afternoon light spilled across the wooden desk. I took an old glass frame, the kind used for diplomas or awards, placed the check in the center, and attached a small metal plate underneath that read, "Proof they knew." Not because I needed the money. I needed evidence. A tangible artifact to remind myself that the memories they denied, the feelings they dismissed, had now been acknowledged by the law, by signatures, by assets, and now by silence. That night, I sat down to write the first draft of a project I'd long dreamed of but never dared name, the D-Files. I chose the name not because it was clever, but because it was simple, just the first letter of my name, but also disregarded, displaced, dismissed. Women pushed beyond the edges of family trust and care. Women like me. I filed the paperwork for nonprofit status the following week. Amanda helped with the legal side. Lucas connected me to a team of financial professionals experienced in reintegration work. I rented a small office on the east side of Austin, where morning sunlight slipped through coarse fabric curtains and a long wooden table could seat 4 people, typing reports, drafting letters, or simply speaking what they'd once been forced to swallow. My first meeting had only 3 attendees. A woman stripped of custody after her husband fabricated psychological records. A young woman whose adoptive mother stole her scholarship funds through legal manipulation. And a woman in her 60s, carrying faded photographs and a copy of the will she never saw after her father died. We didn't cry. No one wanted pity. The only thing that filled the room was listening. I told my story, not from pain, but from purpose. I didn't start with the stolen wedding. I started with the question, why is it that a grown woman, educated, established, can lose all control over her assets and life, just for trusting her own family? No one answered out loud, but their eyes told me. They understood. Since Here's What They Raced went viral, I've received dozens of emails each week. Some just want to talk. Some need lawyers. Some don't even know if they're being manipulated or just too sensitive. I read every single one. I reply to them all. We build case files, summaries, not just to help individuals, but to set precedents, so that when a woman stands in court someday, no one can brush it off with, "It's just family." One morning in June, I got a message from a national organization inviting me to speak at a forum on financial autonomy for adult women. They said I was a rare example of someone who reclaimed herself after being pushed out of her own identity by blood ties. I didn't answer right away. I sat quietly, watching sunlight stretch across the glass frame, warming the check that still sat inside. I thought about my mother, the one who once shoved an anxiety prescription into my hand and said, "I just want you to settle down a bit." I thought about Rachel, the sister who held me when Dad passed away, but later wore my wedding dress without blinking. I thought about Matthew, the man who once promised, "I'll protect you from anyone," then chose to believe a fabricated file. I no longer hold resentment, not because I've forgiven them, but because I no longer belong to that circle. Family isn't a place that's always right. Family doesn't mean you must stay silent. True family is a place that allows you to speak, even if your words shake the room. I wrote the opening line for the speech I was invited to give. Freedom doesn't always come with victory. Sometimes it's just that moment when you open the window in the morning, take a deep breath, and realize no one's trying to decide your life for you anymore. I didn't write anything else. I let the cursor blink after that sentence and just sat there in the stillness and sunlight with no one interrupting. No one telling me to be quiet. What do you think about this story? Have you ever been dismissed just because you stayed quiet? Because you didn't choose to fight loudly like others did? If you've ever felt pushed out of your own life, leave a message. I always want to hear those stories that seem small, but hold entire lives behind them. Because in so many families, what hurts the most isn't one big betrayal. It's the slow, quiet way you're erased from the picture, little by little, day by day. If anything you've just heard resonates with you, share your thoughts below. I believe that when we speak up, we don't just reclaim our own voices, we give courage to others who've been waiting to see they're not alone. And if you want to keep following true stories filled with depth, emotion, and the search for identity, hit that subscribe button, because sometimes the only thing standing between hurt and healing is a story told at just the right moment.